It started with the sound of gurgling. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, holding my coffee mug, in that quiet stillness just before dawn. The birds hadn't yet begun their morning chatter, and the neighborhood was still asleep, wrapped in the illusion that everything was fine. That's when I heard it deep, wet, unnatural, like a drowning creature gasping through the soil beneath my floor. I placed the mug down on the counter and followed the sound to the backyard, and there it was. A patch of my yard near the chain-link fence had transformed overnight into a bubbling mud puddle. A soft geyser of brown water seeped upward through the grass like some foul spring awakened. I stood there blinking at it until the smell hit me, metallic, earthy, with a hint of rust and decay. I didn't need a plumber to tell me the main water line was ruptured. I called in sick to work and got on the phone with Jenkins Plumbing, the only service in town that didn't treat emergencies like mild suggestions. The woman on the line sounded half asleep, but promised a technician would arrive within 2 hours. It was still early enough that no one else in the neighborhood had noticed anything. I paced the yard, coffee forgotten, inspecting the damage. My house sat on the outer rim of the subdivision, technically, just outside the reach of the HOA jurisdiction, though they acted as if the whole block was their dominion. My lot extended slightly downhill, and unbeknownst to most people, it was my land that sloped beneath their fancy back patios and flower beds. I knew the layout better than anyone, mainly because I'd grown up here. My grandfather built the original house decades before the HOA existed. Back then, it was all farmland. After he passed, my parents moved back and built the current house. Now it was mine, deeded and fully paid. At 7:11 a.m., the first knock came. I opened the door to see Karen. Yes, her actual name, standing on my porch in yoga pants and a Patagonia fleece, holding a Stanley cup full of what I assumed was green juice or disdain. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows were already arched in attack mode. "Are you aware," she said without greeting, "that no one on Sunrise Hill Lane has water this morning?" I tilted my head and tried to summon patience. "Good morning to you too." She ignored the sarcasm. "You're the only house on this block doing any kind of digging or plumbing. HOA is very concerned." "I'm not part of the HOA. That doesn't mean you can tamper with shared resources," she snapped. "You've caused a disruption to the entire community." "The pipe burst on my property," I said calmly. "I've already called for repairs. It has nothing to do with shared anything." Karen gave a dramatic sigh and looked past me into the house, as if she expected to find a basement filled with sabotaged water valves and buckets labeled non-compliance. "Then why," she said with an icy sweetness, "did everyone lose water as soon as your yard started bubbling like a third-world swamp?" "Maybe because the subdivision's infrastructure is duct-taped together with outdated maps and wishful thinking," I said. "Maybe the water lines weren't laid out properly when the HOA expanded years ago." "You're avoiding accountability." "I'm literally waiting for a plumber." Her nostrils flared. "Well, I'm calling the president of the HOA and the police." I leaned against the doorframe. "Why the police?" "Because you're tampering with public utilities," she declared, her voice rising. "That's a criminal offense." "No, Karen, it's not. It's my property and my line. Unless you have a warrant or a licensed surveyor in your back pocket, I'd suggest you step off my porch." She huffed and turned without another word, stomping down the steps like she owned gravity itself. By 8:03 a.m., a patrol car rolled up. The officer, a tired-looking man named Sanchez, knocked on my door with none of Karen's theatrical flair. He explained calmly that there had been a complaint, and that Karen claimed I'd deliberately shut off the neighborhood's water. I showed him the backyard. I showed him the bubbling mess. I showed him the flagged markers I'd set up over the years every 5 feet, leading to a metal cap that marked the easement boundary line. Sanchez took notes, nodded, and even took pictures. "She said the HOA owns this system," he said. I handed him a yellowed folder. "This is my grandfather's property deed. This house is older than the HOA. We never signed over rights to any infrastructure. The city annexed the water lines only up to Maple Drive. Everything else is on private land." He skimmed the paperwork, whistled low. "This is pretty airtight." "Tell that to her," I said, nodding toward the corner where Karen was now pacing with her phone in hand, glaring at us like a medieval queen about to order an execution. Sanchez left without incident, but Karen didn't. She stood on the sidewalk, talking loudly into her phone, waving her arms, saying things like infiltration and undermining community structure. The plumber arrived around 10 hours. He surveyed the area, muttered about age and corrosion, and began work with quiet professionalism. I offered him a soda and stayed out of the way. But even then, I felt the storm brewing. By noon, emails from the HOA began to flood my inbox. Subject: urgent compliance breach. Subject: water interruption. Official warning. Subject: HOA legal committee review pending. They were accusing me of deliberately disrupting the neighborhood water supply. One email used the term malicious negligence. Another warned that I could face daily fines until water was restored. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I poured another cup of coffee and sat on my porch as the plumber replaced the burst pipe with copper tubing. I could already hear the neighborhood buzzing behind white vinyl fences. But they didn't know what I knew yet. They didn't know that this wasn't a shared utility. They didn't know that the water flowing through their garden hoses and fancy bathrooms came from pipes buried on land my family never gave up. They didn't know the HOA had been freeloading off our private infrastructure for nearly 2 decades because the original lease had expired silently and never been renewed. But they were about to find out. Because if Karen wanted war over water, then I was ready to bring the flood. By the next morning, the drama had evolved into a full-blown HOA crisis. Or at least that's how Karen framed it in the HOA-wide email she blasted out at 5:52 a.m. Subject: urgent, community under siege by irresponsible resident. Her message was loaded with bolded phrases and passive-aggressive insinuations. Due to the reckless behavior of a non-member property owner, multiple households on Sunrise Hill Lane suffered significant water outages. This individual has refused to acknowledge the shared nature of our infrastructure and has caused disruption with complete disregard for community well-being. She even included a photo of herself pointing at the puddle in my yard, looking like she just discovered an underground crime ring. I didn't respond to the email. I didn't need to. Because what Karen didn't realize was that in trying to publicly humiliate me, she'd shined a very bright light on a question most HOA residents had never thought to ask: who actually owns the pipes beneath their feet? At 9:00 a.m., I was back out on the porch drinking my coffee when I saw the HOA president's car pull up. Mark Lawson, a decent guy, for the most part was usually more diplomatic than his firebrand lieutenant. He climbed out of his SUV in khakis and a golf shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, because of course it was. Morning, he called with forced cheer as he walked up my driveway. I nodded. "You here to investigate the siege?" He sighed. "I'm just trying to clear things up before this becomes a PR mess." I gestured toward the neatly patched section of earth where the plumber had finished repairs. The pipes fixed. Water's flowing again. Not that it was ever my fault. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "Karen says the line you shut off feeds into the shared main that services about 14 homes. That line," I said, "runs through private property I own. And unless the HOA can produce a valid right-of-way or easement agreement, they're not entitled to a single drop of that water." "I get it," he said. "But we didn't know the original infrastructure was on land your family owned. That was never mentioned in our bylaws, because you never asked. The HOA expanded into this area 10 years ago. You assumed the developer had transferred all utility rights to the association. They didn't. My grandfather refused to sign, and my parents never did either." He looked like he was trying to do math in his head. "So you're saying the HOA has been using that pipe illegally?" I finished. "And with no maintenance responsibility, no rent paid, and now you're threatening to fine me. You see where this is going." Mark exhaled and gave a reluctant nod. "Do you have proof?" I stepped inside and came back with the same yellowed file folder I'd shown Officer Sanchez. Inside were property surveys, notarized easement refusals, and the original lease agreement for the water line, which expired 15 years ago. He flipped through it slowly, realizing what I already knew. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a time bomb they'd been standing on for over a decade. By noon, Karen was on the warpath again. A new email arrived, this time more aggressive. "This resident continues to act in bad faith, refusing to cooperate with HOA leadership or acknowledge the communal nature of our neighborhood." She included screenshots of a community group chat where she'd riled up several neighbors with vague threats about emergency meetings and special assessments. Some people chimed in supportively. Others, especially those who had interacted with me over the years, were more skeptical. Didn't the HOA expand without surveying properly? Why was the water line built over his land in the first place? Wait, the HOA never signed a formal usage agreement. That last comment was the one that changed the tide. Suddenly, Karen wasn't the crusader, she was the one who had opened Pandora's box. At 3:00 p.m., I got a knock on the door. This time, it wasn't Mark or the police. It was Lucy Whitmore, a soft-spoken older woman who lived 3 doors down. She was holding a grocery bag with a pie inside. "I heard you were the reason I couldn't make coffee yesterday," she said, not unkindly. I chuckled. Guilty as charged. "Want to come in?" We sat at the kitchen table, and she passed the pie over without ceremony. "Everyone's talking," she said. "Some are mad. Most are confused. But a few of us remember when your granddad used to fix the old pump himself. The water always tasted better back then." I smiled. He refused to let anyone else touch it. She leaned in slightly. "Do you really own the land under the main line?" "Yeah, and I've got the paperwork to prove it." She looked relieved. "Good. Because Karen's been going around saying you're trying to sabotage the HOA. She's even started circulating a petition to remove any non-compliant residents from community benefits." I stared at her. "What benefits? I've never used a single HOA facility." She says the HOA will cut off trash collection, holiday lighting lawn, spraying anything she can legally argue is a shared service. I laughed. "Let her. I don't need any of it." "But we might," Lucy said gently. "We need someone who knows what they're doing. Someone who can show people what's really going on." That stuck with me. Not just because of the compliment, but because it was the first time in years someone looked at me not like a hermit at the edge of town, but as a neighbor with value. That night, I scanned all the documents into a digital folder, added annotations, and created a shared link. Then I wrote a single post in the neighborhood forum. "For those who've asked, here's the legal documentation regarding the water system on my property. It was never transferred to the HOA. The original lease expired. No compensation has been made since. You're welcome to verify all documents with the county registrar. I don't wish harm on anyone, but I won't be threatened or fined for protecting what's legally mine. Marcus." No flair, no drama, just facts. By morning, over 60 people had viewed the link. 20 had liked the post. 5 had privately messaged me to ask if they could get a copy. Karen didn't respond, not at first, but I knew it was only a matter of time before she regrouped. HOA Karens don't back down. They escalate. And when she did, I'd be ready. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that I wasn't just defending a pipeline. I was defending the legacy of a man who built something from scratch. And I had more than property rights on my side. I had the truth. 2 days passed in uneasy silence. Karen hadn't replied to the forum post. Mark hadn't followed up. But I knew better than to mistake quiet for retreat. HOAs don't give up. They regroup reward and come back stronger, armed with bylaws, obscure clauses, and in this case, public perception. So when a second patrol car showed up at 8:42 a.m. on a Friday morning, I wasn't surprised. This time, it wasn't Officer Sanchez. It was Officer Elaine Durham, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with piercing eyes and a clipboard that seemed to carry more weight than her service belt. She approached with caution, her cruiser parked deliberately to block my driveway. I met her on the porch with a calm nod. "Morning, officer. Are you Marcus Lane?" "I am." She checked her clipboard. "We've received a formal complaint from the Sunrise Hill Homeowners Association. Allegations include illegal interference with public utilities, willful negligence, and potential environmental hazard." I blinked. That's quite a list. She didn't smile. "Do you mind if I take a look at the work site?" I gestured toward this backyard. "Be my guest." We walked side by side across the yard. The sun was bright but cool, and the grass was still damp with dew. The repaired section of soil was now dry and firm, with copper piping clearly visible where it connected above ground to the water main housing. Bright orange marker flags outlined the legal boundaries, and a laminated copy of the property survey was pinned to a stake. Officer Durham knelt to inspect the piping. "Licensed plumber." "Yes, I have the invoice inspection sheet and a signed compliance certificate in my file." She glanced at me. "You're well prepared. Years of dealing with HOA nonsense will do that." She let out a small breath that was dangerously close to a laugh. "Mind if I look at the documents?" I returned to the house and came back with the folder. She flipped through it, skimming the lease agreement, land deed, and the easement documentation, or more importantly, the lack of any active easement transferring infrastructure control to the HOA. After 5 minutes, she closed the folder. "Everything seems in order," she said, "but I'll need to file a report. They're pushing hard." I crossed my arms. I figured. She hesitated, then added, "Off the record, you've got a stronger case than most I've seen in 10 years. But be careful. HOA boards like this don't stop. They shift tactics. If they can't beat you legally, they'll try to isolate you socially, economically. I nodded slowly. They already started. By noon, Karen had posted a new bulletin. This one wasn't just about me, it was a campaign. Emergency town hall to protect our homes, our water, and our future. All residents are invited to a mandatory HOA meeting this Saturday. Topic: community safety, infrastructure ownership, and the danger of rogue properties. Rogue properties. That was me. She attached photos of the patrol car in my driveway. Cropped, of course, just enough to imply guilt, not enough to show the officer leaving peacefully. In the replies, some residents asked legitimate questions. Others posted angry emojis. A few defenders quoted my forum post and asked for civility. But the tone had changed. Karen had shifted the narrative from technical dispute to community threat. That evening I went digging, not in the yard, online. I searched the county records archive, the original land development maps, and scanned through HOA formation documents. I looked for keywords: infrastructure transfer, public utility, designation, shoreline rights. And then I found it. A PDF from 15 years ago, just before the HOA expanded into our part of the block. Buried in the appendix of a developer's land transfer agreement was a clause that read, "Lots 28 through 30 retain autonomous utility access unless otherwise negotiated with the property owner. No easement or deed transfer shall be implied." Lots 28 through 30 included my home, my land, my water line. It was the final nail. I printed it out, highlighted the clause, and slipped it into the folder. Then I emailed Mark Lawson and the HOA legal liaison, attaching a scanned copy with one line of text. "This clause supersedes your claim. Please stop harassing me, or I will pursue legal remedies." Saturday came fast. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. in the community center, a building I had never stepped foot in despite living here my entire life. I arrived at 3:45, wearing jeans, a collared shirt, and boots still dusty from the backyard. I brought my folder. The room was packed. Karen stood at the front in a sharp navy suit, flanked by Dawn, her ever-smirking sidekick, and a few new board members I didn't recognize. Mark wasn't present. Karen cleared her throat into the microphone. "We'll begin shortly." Then she saw me. Her eyes narrowed. I took a seat in the third row. A few neighbors nodded politely. Lucy gave me a quiet thumbs up from the back. The meeting began with a speech full of vague warnings. Karen talked about infrastructure sabotage, land misuse, the risk of dangerous precedents, and how some residents have chosen not to follow the spirit of community unity. She paused, letting the room stew. Then she gestured toward a projector screen where she displayed a diagram of the neighborhood, and unsurprisingly, a big red X over my property. "This," she said, "is what happens when someone refuses to acknowledge the systems that make our lives safe and predictable." I stood up. I'd like to respond. A few gasps. Karen tried to speak again, but the room murmured louder. People wanted to hear what I had to say. She yielded. I walked to the front, folder in hand, and took the mic. "I'm Marcus Lane. I live on lot 30. My house was built before this HOA existed. My grandfather dug the first water trench here with his own hands. The pipe that serves this block, at least the upper stretch, runs through land I own under a system my family built, maintained, and for many years leased out through formal agreement." I opened the folder, pulled out the map, and held it up. "This clause," I said, pointing to the highlighted section, "states clearly that no easement or transfer was ever granted for the utilities under my land. Your board never negotiated usage. They assumed control without paperwork. And now, instead of apologizing, you're trying to paint me as a criminal." I looked straight at Karen. "My property rights are not a threat to this community, but your behavior is." Silence. Then someone clapped. Then more. Karen's jaw tightened. Don leaned over to whisper something in her ear, but she waved him off. The power in the room had shifted, and they all felt it. The meeting ended awkwardly. Karen didn't say another word once I stepped down. The applause had not been thunderous, but it was loud enough to shake the air of control she tried to maintain. A few residents came up to me afterward, some curious, others apologetic. One man, Glenn, from 4 houses up, even offered a handshake and said, "Didn't know any of that. Good for you." I walked home with the folder tucked under my arm, the claws inside like a secret weapon. I'd won that round, yes, but the war wasn't over. Karen wasn't the kind to accept defeat, especially not publicly. Sure enough, by Sunday morning, a new message was posted on the HOA bulletin board. "Dear residents, in light of recent confusion surrounding infrastructure rights, The board is consulting with legal counsel. We remain committed to protecting the values and standards of our community. Further updates will be provided. The HOA board. Confusion, she said, as if the words, highlighted in yellow, weren't written in black and white legalese by the very developers she worshipped. By Tuesday, a thick manila envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Just my name written in all caps. Inside was a cease and desist letter on HOA letterhead, no less accusing me of slander, public defamation, and inciting community disruption. The letter demanded I take down the forum post, apologize in writing, and cease illegal control over communal resources. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the letter into my coffee. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Charlene Hargrove, a no-nonsense property rights specialist who had once filed a restraining order against an HOA for entering a client's backyard during a barbecue. She read the letter and let out a sigh that could have blown over a pine tree. They're bluffing, she said. I figured. But if they're this bold, it means they're scared. It also means they might try something bigger. I explained the history, the maps, the clause. I even showed her the footage from the town hall meeting, which I had discreetly recorded with my phone. This is good, she said. Real good. They have no legal standing, Marcus. The clause holds up. You're not just safe, you're in a position to fight back. I don't want to fight, I said. I just want them to leave me alone. She tilted her head. That's not how bullies work. Charlene sent an official response on her firm's letterhead. It stated in precise legal terms that I had not defamed anyone. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my property or its infrastructure. Any further harassment would be considered grounds for civil litigation. It was a measured warning, but it made a point. The letter was sent to the HOA board, CC'd to the city planning department, and posted at my attorney's advice to the same neighborhood forum, publicly. That part wasn't subtle. The reactions were immediate. Dozens of comments flooded in. Wait, the HOA doesn't own the pipes. Why are we paying fees if the water's not even theirs? Karen needs to explain herself. I want to see the documents. This affects all of us. People began asking questions, real ones. And that's when things started to unravel. Not for me, but for Karen. Within 72 hours, the local paper picked up the story. It wasn't front-page material, but the headline stung. Homeowner challenges HOA over water rights and wins. The article quoted Charlene, referenced the developer clause, and included a photo of the map. Karen declined to comment, but someone from the board provided a vague statement about ongoing reviews. Meanwhile, I noticed a subtle shift in the neighborhood's behavior. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved. A teenager on a skateboard shouted "Water Hero" as he passed by my driveway. Even Lucy, the quiet woman from 2 houses down, brought over banana bread with a sticky note that said, "Thank you for standing up to them." But not everyone was happy. Don drove by my house 3 times in one day. I knew because I was watching. The 3rd time, he parked across the street and sat in his car for 10 minutes, engine running. I didn't go out, I didn't wave, I just watched. That weekend, Charlene called with an idea. You said they use your land for piping, right? Yeah. And you never signed an easement agreement. Never. Then it's technically unauthorized use of private property. You're within your rights to revoke access. Are you suggesting I shut off their water? No, she said with a chuckle. Not unless you want to start a riot. But you can post signs. You can make it clear you're no longer offering access for free. And you can demand compensation. Compensation. A lease agreement, she said, backdated, with fair market rate. If they don't agree, you file a property encroachment suit. That'll scare them more than any cease and desist. I didn't answer right away. I walked to the window and looked out over the sloping hill where the pipes ran out of my land under their feet. Power ran through those pipes, but for once it was mine. I never wanted to weaponize water. That was the last thing on my mind when I first started this whole journey. All I wanted was for Karen and the HOA to back off, respect the legal documents, and stop trying to micromanage a system they neither built nor understood. But now, as I stood overlooking the hill, where the main line snaked through my property, copper and steel hiding beneath generations of soil and moss, I realized something. They had always assumed it belonged to them, because no one ever told them otherwise. And power once assumed becomes entitlement. That had to end. The next morning, I drafted a letter. Nothing aggressive, nothing inflammatory, just clear, professional, and backed by law. To the Sunrise Hill Homeowners Association Board, this letter serves as formal notice that the underground water infrastructure passing through my privately owned land, is not under HOA jurisdiction. Per the original land use agreement, Reference Clause 7.3, Appendix C, no easement or transfer of control was ever granted to the HOA or any related party. As such, continued use of this infrastructure constitutes unauthorized access to private property. To rectify this, I am offering a lease agreement for pipeline access at a fair market rate of $1, $250 per month, retroactive to the date of HOA formation, 12 years, equals $180,000. I am open to negotiation. Failure to respond within 14 days will be considered refusal, and access may be restricted pending legal review. Respectfully, Marcus Lane. I mailed it via certified post, emailed a PDF copy, and because I knew Karen wouldn't be able to resist a little theater, I taped a printed copy to the inside of my glass front door for everyone passing by to see. By noon the next day, my phone rang. Marcus Lane, the voice asked stiffly. Speaking. This is Gerald West, legal counsel for the Sunrise Hill HOA. Finally, they brought in a real lawyer. I've reviewed your letter, he said. And while I disagree with some of your interpretations, I admit the clause you referenced does raise questions. The board would prefer to avoid litigation. I'm sure they're willing to consider negotiation, but the back payment is off the table. That's a non-starter. I let the silence stretch. I'm listening, I said eventually. We'd like to propose a lease at $500 a month going forward, 5-year term with annual review. That was less than half of what I asked, but it was still a concession. A recognition that they were not, in fact, in control. I'll think about it, I said. I'll send my lawyer a copy and get back to you. Of course, but please understand, Marcus, they're not used to this. Neither am I said. But maybe it's time they got used to being challenged. Charlene was thrilled. Marcus, they blinked, she said. This is what leverage looks like. I suggest countering, ask for $900, 3-year term, no retroactive fees. It shows flexibility, but keeps the pressure. I agreed. And just like that, I wasn't the embattled homeowner anymore. I was a landlord. The forum exploded with speculation. Someone leaked a screenshot of the letter. The debate went viral in our little HOA-obsessed corner of the world. Wait, Marcus owns the pipeline. He should have shut off the water the second they sent the cops. Karen's got to resign now. This is embarrassing. Honestly, he's being more civil than I would have been. Then came the memes. Someone photoshopped my head onto Aqualand's body with the caption, "Water is power." I laughed for 10 minutes straight. Karen, meanwhile, went silent. No more bulletins. No more safety concerns. No more HOA virtue signaling. It was like someone had unplugged her keyboard. Until she made one last desperate move. I woke up on Thursday to find a crew of contractors standing on the edge of my property. They wore reflective vests and carried measuring tools. One of them held a clipboard. "Can I help you?" I asked, walking over in sweatpants and slippers. HOA hired us to evaluate a rerouting option, one said. New water line to bypass this stretch of land. My eyebrows lifted. Seriously? Yeah. Said there were easement complications. I smiled. Well, unless they're planning to dig through the solid rock on the east side or get permission from 3 other private landowners to the west, I wish you luck. They looked at each other. I pulled out my phone. Also, you're on private property. I suggest stepping back to the sidewalk. They left. Fast. That night, I got a message from Glenn. Karen was ranting at the mailbox today. She said you're holding the community hostage. Then Lucy reminded her, you didn't shut off anyone's water, you just asked to be paid fairly. Karen stormed off. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Letting other people speak was more powerful now than shouting myself. By week's end, the HOA board voted to accept the lease at $900 a month. They didn't apologize. They didn't explain. They just signed and sent it back. I framed the contract and hung it beside the map in my office. Water rights, pipeline sovereignty, infrastructure control. Things no one had ever noticed until now. But the real victory came quietly. I was trimming my rose bushes when Lucy walked over with a cup of coffee. She held it out. Peace offering, she said, for being the most stubborn man on the block. I laughed. You brought me decaf. She smiled. Thought you could use something calm. We sat on the porch, 2 neighbors watching the sunset over a lawn that had for once no patrol cars or contractor boots stomping through it. Thanks for doing what you did, she said softly. I just stood up. Well, sometimes that's all it takes. The new lease agreement changed the tone in the neighborhood, but not everyone was ready to let go of old grudges, especially not Karen. She'd gone unusually quiet since the vote. No more surprise inspections, no scathing bulletins about community decline, no side-eye glances during walks past my lawn. It wasn't peace, though. It was the silence before a storm, and I'd lived long enough to know the difference. The truth, I didn't trust it. Then one morning I found a puddle on the gravel trail behind my tool shed. At first, I figured it was just the usual morning dew or runoff from a neighbor's sprinkler. But the water was trickling from the exact spot where the HOA's main line fed into the secondary pipes that snaked through my lower property. I crouched down, brushed some gravel aside, and saw it, a small but steady leak hissing out of a rusted coupling. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but give it a few days and we'd be looking at erosion, water waste, and maybe even a property sink if the ground got too saturated. I knew what this meant: time to call a plumber. But more importantly, time to call Charlene. Charlene arrived an hour later, trench boots on, hair in a ponytail, and a clipboard under her arm. I pointed out the leak and she took photos from every angle, made notes, and ran her fingers along the edge of the pipe. "Here's the fun part," she said. "According to your lease, you're not responsible for repairs. They are." I figured. "But they'll claim it's on my land, so it's my problem." "Nope," she said, tapping the line in the contract. "Remember Section 3B, the HOA assumes full responsibility for maintenance and repair of any water infrastructure located on or passing through the leased property. This leak falls squarely on them. What if they drag their feet? Then we take it public again. But first, let's give them the chance to fix it, politely." I sent the HOA board a short, concise email with photographic evidence and a copy of the lease clause. I even gave them a 2-week grace period before I'd be forced to escalate. I kept it friendly, fair, and civil. They replied within 18 hours. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will coordinate with our maintenance contractor and address the issue as soon as possible. HOA Maintenance Committee." It sounded reasonable, but it also sounded like a form letter, and I had a hunch something else was going on. 3 days later, a white van pulled up outside my driveway, unmarked except for a faded logo on the rear doors: Metro Systems and Repair. A pair of men got out, mid-40s, blue jeans, reflective vests. One had a clipboard, the other a pipe camera. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, as they surveyed the area, traced the pipe route, and then stood over the leak. After a brief conversation, they got back in the van and drove off. No digging, no patching, no repair. That evening, I received a text from Glenn. "Karen said the leak isn't their fault. Claimed the HOA did a private inspection and found your modifications caused the rupture." She's talking about legal retaliation. Sound familiar? Of course it did. I called Charlene. She sighed so hard I could hear her breath whistle through the phone. "They're trying to flip it on you. Standard HOA nonsense. Let me write a response." Within a day, she sent a new letter, not just to the board, but CCing the City Water Authority, the Neighborhood Forum, moderators, and the local property inspection office. It laid everything out: the lease, the maintenance clause, the photos, and the HOA's refusal to act. She even included an estimate from a certified plumber showing the cost of repair: $780 for the patch plus $400 for labor. And then came the kicker. If repairs are not completed within 7 business days, my client will take action to temporarily seal the leak to prevent further damage to his land at the HOA's expense. That lit the fuse. The forum blew up again. Why won't they fix the leak? He's offering to do it himself and bill them. What's the issue? Karen needs to go. This is getting ridiculous. If Marcus wanted to, he could probably shut off the whole street by now. Someone even made a meme of a cartoon HOA board plugging leaks with duct tape labeled "Denial." By day 6, the leak had grown worse. The puddle now covered a 3-foot radius, and the smell of algae lingered in the summer air. That evening, while I was setting up a hose to redirect some of the overflow, I heard footsteps behind me. "Need a hand?" a voice asked. It was Don, the former HOA president, ousted after my water clause went public. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I shut off the pipe valve months ago. He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. I heard Karen's digging in her heels again. "I'm just trying to protect my property," I said calmly. He nodded. "I know. Listen, I still have friends on the board. They're tired of the drama. If you let me talk to them, maybe we can fix this before it gets worse." "Why are you helping now?" He looked at the puddle, then at the leaking pipe. "Because eventually, they'll push the wrong person too far. And next time, that person might not be as patient as you." The next morning, the repair van came back. This time, they had gear. Shovels, barriers, a backhoe. They marked the perimeter, cordoned off the work area, and finally, finally began patching the line. I watched from my office window as they dug up the broken section, replaced the coupling, and reburied the pipeline. The whole process took 4 hours. No apology, no bulletin, no acknowledgement, but that was fine. The silence was enough. That night, I updated the forum. Leak repaired as of 3:22 p.m. today, thanks to those who supported reason over rhetoric. This isn't about pride. It's about principle. And everyone deserves to live in a community where those are respected. The post received over 100 likes. Lucy texted me later. Karen's not going to survive this one. Someone's already collecting signatures for a recall vote. I didn't respond, but I smiled. Because the leak they were afraid of wasn't just the one underground. It was the truth leaking into the community, one clause, one crack, one neighbor at a time. Summer faded. The trees along Sunrise Hill began to blush red and gold, and with the changing leaves came a shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere, one colder than the approaching wind. It was subtle at first. A few passing glances held longer. Hushed conversation stopped when I stepped onto my porch. Some neighbors I used to nod to now just looked away. The leak incident had turned me into a symbol. Not everyone liked what I symbolized. Charlene called it the backlash phase. They thought you were the quiet guy with the boat, she said. But now you're the man who cost the HOA thousands and proved them wrong twice. I didn't cost them anything. I saved the whole neighborhood from a burst pipeline. She chuckled. You think that's how they see it? I didn't answer, because I knew better. Then one morning, the water went cold. Not a slow fade to lukewarm, not a half-hearted trickle. Just stone cold first thing in the morning glacier runoff. The kind of cold that stops you mid-shower and makes you question your life choices. I checked the thermostat fine. Water heater still on. Pipes no leaks or bursts. I went outside and traced the main line. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A tag, taped to the metal casing where the HOA line fed into my subline. It read, routine maintenance, temporary restriction. Contact HOA for details. It wasn't even signed. I marched straight to my phone and dialed the HOA number. No one picked up. I left a message, then texted Glenn, who replied almost instantly. Karen's new idea, rotational conservation. Says it's to manage utility usage during seasonal transition. I don't buy it. Neither did I. So I pulled out the lease. There it was, black and white, lessor reserves uninterrupted utility access under any and all seasonal or administrative HOA operations, meaning they had no right to touch my line. I went back out, stripped off the tag, and reopened the valve. 15 minutes later, my water was hot again, but 2 days later, it was cold again. Then hot the next, then cold. A pattern. Someone was manually shutting it off, and only to my line. They weren't even subtle about it. I set up a trail cam near the valve box. Not hidden, just discreet. Tucked between 2 shrubs angled at the spot where the restriction tag had been taped. It took only 2 nights. And on the second, at 3:12 a.m., a shadowy figure approached the valve box with a flashlight and a wrench. Karen, in her leopard print robe and pink slippers, twisting the valve like she was defusing a bomb. I nearly spit my coffee all over the screen. Charlene was less amused. She's trespassing. That's sabotage. She'll say she was checking a leak. She's not a plumber, Marcus. That's not a defense. We sent a cease and desist letter. This time we added a formal trespass warning. It was signed, time-stamped, and hand-delivered by courier to the HOA office. Karen didn't respond. But at the next HOA meeting held over Zoom, because of ongoing security concerns, she finally lost it. Marcus is manipulating the system for personal gain, she hissed. Her face flushed on camera. He's exploiting technicalities to challenge the order of this community. And now he's accusing people of crimes. Because you committed one, Glenn muttered. His mic was on. The chat exploded with comments. So you did touch his line. She admitted it. You can't shut off someone's water just because you're mad. This is abuse of power. Karen tried to pivot, saying I'd been hostile and uncooperative. I leaned forward and turned on my camera. Let's clarify something, I said. I didn't sue. I didn't find anyone. I asked for respect, and when I was denied that, I used the law, the same law that governs all of us, to make sure no one else would be steamrolled just because they weren't in the right clique. I paused, and my water is staying on. Click, I turned off the mic. That night, I received a message from Lucy. They're calling for an emergency board vote. Karen's days are numbered. Sure enough, 2 days later, an anonymous ballot was distributed to the HOA members. The motion, immediate removal of acting HOA president Karen Littman due to breach of conduct and interference with member utilities. By Friday, the votes were counted. 72% in favor of removal, Karen was out. The next president was Glenn. He didn't want the job, but people trusted him, and he trusted me. Our first conversation as president and water leaseholder happened on my back porch under the October sun. "I don't want to fight with anyone," he said. "I just want peace." "So do I." "You've got knowledge, you've got leverage, and you've got half the forum calling you Water Moses." I laughed. "Help me steer this ship straight," he said, from inside. I didn't answer right away. I just stared out over the pine trees that edged the lake, thinking of how far we'd come. I wasn't just fighting back anymore. I was being asked to help rebuild. A month into Glenn's presidency, the air in our neighborhood finally felt breathable again. HOA meetings ran shorter, the petty notices slowed, and even the community Facebook group became less of a battlefield. But the lakefront, that was still mine. Still peaceful, still mine. Until one crisp Saturday morning, Glenn knocked on my door. He wore that same nervous half-smile I remembered from our run-ins with Karen. Only now, it had a weight behind it, the kind that comes with leadership no one wanted. "Hey," he said, "I need to ask a favor." I raised an eyebrow. Favor or problem? Little of both. Can I come in? We sat at my kitchen table, steaming mugs of coffee between us. Glenn took a breath and set a folder down in front of me. "This is the HOA's annual Fall Festival proposal. It's always held by the lake. Big deal for the families, the kids, even the retirees. Usually we do it at the park section by the dock." I nodded, already sensing where this was going. "But now that your lease covers that shoreline technically, we need your permission." Technically was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. I flipped through this folder. They had planned for tents, a pumpkin patch, live music, even a BBQ pit near the water. A well-organized event. No Karen-style overreach. "You want to rent the space," I said. "Exactly. A simple license agreement. 1 weekend. We'll handle cleanup. We'll even pay a nominal fee, if needed." I leaned back. The irony hit me like a quiet wave. The HOA who once tried to tow my boat and shut off my water was now asking to rent land from me. I could have refused, could have said not a chance and made a point. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was the way Glenn asked earnest, not entitled. Or maybe it was the sight of little kids in the brochure drawings, their faces painted like pumpkins and superheroes. I lived here long enough to know that not everyone in the HOA was the enemy. Most folks just wanted normalcy, not drama. So I said yes with conditions. I wrote up a simple one-page agreement. It read more like a letter than a contract. License granted for temporary use of leased lakefront space on October 21st, 22 for Fall Festival purposes only. Usage includes installation of temporary tents, limited food services, and safe recreational activities. No permanent structures or alterations permitted. Lessee HOA assumes full liability for damages or injuries during event. All waste and materials must be removed within 24 hours of festival end. Total usage fee, $1. Payment to be made in exact cash, framed please. I slid it across the table. Glenn read it twice. Then he laughed. "You want me to frame $1? Just as a reminder, I said, that control isn't the same as ownership. And humility is always cheaper than litigation. He shook my hand. Deal made. The week leading up to the festival, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid me now waved. Kids stopped by to ask if they could fish by the dock, asking, not assuming. One of the older ladies, Mrs. Franklin, even baked me a pecan pie and said she missed seeing my boat out on the lake. "I always liked the way it bobbed," she said. "Reminded me of simpler times." Then came the festival. And for the first time in a long time, the lake felt like it belonged to everyone. Kids ran barefoot through hay bales. Parents lounged in folding chairs with hot cider. Teenagers took selfies with the scarecrows lined along the dock. At one point, Glenn gave a short speech. "Today wouldn't be possible," he said, "without the generosity of someone who believed that even after conflict, community can be rebuilt." People clapped. I stood in the back, arms crossed, not saying a word. But I felt something shift again. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about legacy. That night, as the lanterns along the dock flickered against the water, a woman approached me. She looked familiar, short gray hair, sun-worn face, floral scarf. "I'm Karen's sister," she said. That caught me off guard. She told me what happened. Not all of it, she added quickly, but enough to know she got in over her head. She did more than that. "I know. I just wanted to say thank you for not humiliating her." "You could have, you didn't." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. "Sometimes," she said, "it takes more strength to forgive than to fight." Then she walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Later that week, Glenn delivered the framed dollar bill. It was mounted on black velvet encased in polished glass. The plaque underneath read, "For Peace Not Power, October 21st, 2025. I hung it on the wall above my desk, right next to the lease. But the story doesn't end there, because peace is a funny thing. Sometimes it's the quiet between storms, and sometimes it's the kind you build yourself, one act of grace at a time. 2 months passed since the fall festival, and the framed dollar bill still hung proudly above my desk. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at it during quiet mornings, sipping coffee, and watching mist roll across the lake. It was more than a souvenir. It was a symbol of turning tides, how control and conflict had slowly given way to connection and community. But peace, I was learning, is not a permanent state, especially not when bureaucracy is involved. It started with a knock on the door. I opened it to find a courier holding a large envelope marked Urgent, HOA Infraction Notice. Another one, I muttered. Inside was a letter from the HOA's new compliance officer, a man named Philip Cray. I'd never met him. The letter, however, was all too familiar. "You are in violation of Section 3.4.7 of the Community Bylaws, Unauthorized Storage Structures. The small shed located adjacent to your dock has not been approved by the HOA Architectural Review Board. You are hereby fined 1,200 and required to dismantle the structure within 14 days. I stared at the page, dumbfounded. The shed, the one that had been there before I even leased the shoreline. I walked out to it just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. The old storage shed, maybe 6 feet by 8, sat quietly behind a pine tree. Weather-beaten moss on the shingles, but still sturdy. I used it for rope oars, spare motor oil, and the occasional camping lantern. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. Or at least I thought it was. I called Glenn. "Don't tell me this is your doing." "No," he sighed. "Phillips knew. Hired him to clean up paperwork from Karen's term. He's overzealous. I don't care if he alphabetizes every blade of grass in the HOA manual." That shed was there long before me. "I believe you," Glenn said. "But if it's not on file, Philip considers it non-compliant. Bureaucratic logic. Well, tell Philip he can take his logic and apply it to something that actually matters." Glenn chuckled, but didn't promise anything. "Best bet," he said. "Dig up whatever you've got, permits, photos, anything, and submit a formal exemption request." I gritted my teeth. I wasn't about to tear down my shed just because some clipboard warrior with a superiority complex missed a memo. That night, I pulled out the original lease paperwork. It had been years since I'd needed to read past page 2. But this time, I dug deeper. I flipped through annexes, footnotes, even the old township appendices. And that's when I found it. Addendum C, Structures and Maintenance. Paragraph 4. Lessee may maintain or improve existing auxiliary structures on leased land, provided such structures are present prior to lease execution date. No additional approval shall be required from third-party residential associations not party to the lease. I blinked, then read it again. Then a third time. There it was. Buried in the fine print, but plain as day. The HOA had no authority over my shed. I printed the clause, highlighted it, and wrote a formal response. To Philip Cray, HOA Compliance, Subject Infraction Refutation. Unauthorized Storage Structure. Dear Mr. Cray, per your letter dated November 14th, 2025, I am writing to dispute the infraction regarding the lakeside storage structure on my leased property. As outlined in Addendum C, Paragraph 4 of my lease agreement with the county copy attached, the shed in question is explicitly grandfathered under the terms of that lease. Your organization, not being a party to said lease, has no jurisdiction over this structure. Please confirm withdrawal of the fine and removal of this infraction from your records. Sincerely, Marcus Trent. I CC'd Glenn and the county land office for good measure. 2 days later, I received an automated response. Your dispute has been received and will be reviewed within 10 business days. But I wasn't about to wait. I emailed the letter to the community forum. I titled the post, "They fined me over a shed, but missed the clause that says they can't." It spread like wildfire. Comments poured in. "I've got a pergola they flagged last year, wonder if I'm covered too." "Why is the HOA fighting the guy who saved the lake? We need an audit of these compliance notices." "Marcus, you're a damn hero." Glenn called me that evening. "You just triggered a wave of infraction appeals. Philip's panicking." Let him panic. Maybe he'll find the rest of the lease while he's at it. 4 days later, I received a second envelope, this one hand-delivered. Inside was a letter from Philip Cray. No signature, no apology. Just one sentence. The infraction and associated fine have been rescinded effective immediately. That should have been the end of it. But then something unexpected happened. The county clerk, a sharp-witted woman named Denise, whom I hadn't seen since the lease signing, called me. "You've stirred up quite the storm," she said. "Mind if I ask a favor in return?" "Depends. Can we use your lease case as a precedent?" "For what?" "To push back against HOA overreach across the county. Your case is airtight. If we cite your lease publicly, we can help other residents understand their rights." I thought about it. The shed, the dock, the water, the fines, they weren't just personal anymore. They were political. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop playing defense. "Use it," I said, "but make sure people read the fine print." Denise laughed. "You might just end up on a billboard." The next HOA meeting was packed. Not just with residents, but reporters, lawyers, and even 2 people from the state housing office. Glenn opened the meeting with a quiet smile and a note of formality I'd never heard from him before. "We are here tonight to revisit the question of authority," he said, "and to redefine our role not as enforcers, but as stewards of a community that doesn't need to be afraid of its own rules." He gestured to me. "Marcus, you've got the floor." I stood up, holding the lease in one hand and the rescinded fine notice in the other. "Power doesn't come from control," I said. "It comes from clarity. From knowing your rights and standing your ground when others pretend you don't have any." There was silence, then applause, then change. 3 weeks after the storm of infraction appeals, the neighborhood had changed again. Not with noise or drama this time, but with a kind of quiet recalibration. People had stopped walking on eggshells around the HOA. Conversations became less about fines and more about projects, ideas, and improvements. For the first time in years, neighbors were talking about building instead of bracing for battle. Still, I wasn't entirely at ease. There was one more issue lingering in the background. The original source of conflict, the one no one had dared bring up since Karen left. The water. More specifically, the community's private water system. It had been installed nearly 25 years ago, long before I moved in, as a cooperative venture between the neighborhood developer and the county. The HOA managed the billing, but ownership of the actual infrastructure, the pipes, meters, and pumps, had always been murky. Until I shut off my water during the boat incident, no one questioned it. Then came the threats, the police, and eventually the revelations about the land lease. But in the chaos of everything else, the fall festival, the shed, the meeting speech, that issue had been quietly left unresolved. Until now, it was Glenn who brought it up. We met again at my kitchen table. The framed dollar bill was still there, catching sunlight through the window. "I think we should talk about the system," he said. "You mean the water?" He nodded. "Phillips got it in his head that we need to modernize the water meters, but the contractors won't even bid unless we can prove legal ownership of the system. Which, well, no one can." I leaned back, arms crossed. "You're saying it's still not clear whether the HOA owns the water infrastructure?" "Not just unclear," Glenn said. "Turns out the original utility agreement from 1998 was never formally recorded. Some of it defaulted back to the county. But then the county transferred rights to a temporary developer shell company, which expired. So no one owns it. No one except maybe you." That got my attention. "What do you mean?" Glenn pulled a folder from his satchel and opened it on the table. "See here," he said, pointing at a yellowed survey map. "This includes your parcel, the lake lease boundaries, and here the main water conduit that runs underneath your property line." "Right through the ridge," I said. "Exactly. And according to this amended document from 2013, when you renewed your lakefront lease, you also agreed to allow access to the water maintenance lines, which means I'm legally responsible for part of the infrastructure." "Not responsible," Glenn said carefully, "but your lease includes it as part of your domain." I whistled. "So the HOA threatened me with cops over a system that I technically control." Glenn grimaced. "Looks that way." Later that week, I drove down to the county land records office to confirm it all. The clerk, Denise, was already waiting for me with a grin. "Mr. Trent," she said, "we've been expecting you." She handed me a thick binder labeled Infrastructure Agreements, Lakeside Ridge HOA. "You might want to sit down." For the next 2 hours, I reviewed a bureaucratic maze of transfer letters, partial deeds, expired licenses, and abandoned easements. At the center of it all, a single sentence in my lease renewal form: "Lessee shall maintain unobstructed access to all subsurface lines and environmental equipment within the leased lakefront parcel, including but not limited to meter vaults, pressure regulators, and municipal intake infrastructure." It was subtle, but the implications were massive. In legal terms, I didn't just lease the land. I controlled the only access point to the entire HOA water supply. I went home and slept on it. The next morning, I made a decision. I grabbed an old wooden post, a weather-treated signboard, and painted a simple message in bold black letters. Then, I walked out to the utility meter at the edge of my property, the same one Karen once tried to shut off, and hammered the post into the ground. The sign read, "This system runs through leased private land. Any interference must be requested in writing. All maintenance subject to prior agreement with landholder. Inquiries contact Marcus Trent. Water belongs to everyone. Control belongs to no one." I stepped back and smiled. Let them chew on that for a while. That evening, I got a text from Glenn. "You really posted a sign?" I sent him a picture. Respect, not resistance. That's the new motto, right? Within days, the conversation around water access became collaborative. No more HOA decrees, no more veiled threats. Instead, Glenn proposed forming a community water board separate from the HOA, made up of residents and volunteers to help manage usage and modernization. And guess who they asked to chair it? I said no, of course, but I agreed to be their technical advisor. My only request, no more fines, no more intimidation, just clean, clear policy. They agreed. 6 months later, a new plaque was installed by the lake. It wasn't flashy, just a smooth stone with engraved letters nestled among wildflowers by the dock. It read, "Lakeside belongs to all. Maintained by community. Protected by knowledge." In honor of Marcus Trent, who read the fine print so we didn't have to. People took photos beside it. One neighbor even said it looked like something out of a movie. I smiled, waved it off. Truth is, I didn't need a plaque. Just watching kids fish off the dock again with no fear of fines or interference, that was enough. And as for Karen, last I heard she moved to Arizona. Rumor had it she joined a different HOA. Hopefully one with fewer lakes. And more signs reminding her that power unchecked always comes with a cost.